The snow fell in thick, silent curtains across the northern wilderness, blanketing the world in white. In a small village nestled between the mountains, a boy named Thomas sat by the window of his family's cabin, watching the storm gather strength. He was 12 years old, with dark hair that fell across his forehead and eyes that held a quiet wisdom beyond his years. Thomas had been born with a twisted leg that made walking difficult. While other children ran through the forests and climbed the rocky hills, he moved slowly, carefully, always aware of his limitations. His father, a hard man weathered by harsh winters and harder times, saw only the burden. His mother had passed when Thomas was young, leaving him alone with a father who grew colder with each passing season. The village elders spoke in whispers about families who could not afford to keep every mouth fed through the winter. Thomas had heard the stories. Children left in the woods, the weak abandoned to make room for the strong. He never imagined those whispers would one day be about him. It happened on the worst night of the winter. The blizzard had been building for 3 days, and the temperature dropped until the very air seemed to freeze. Thomas's father stood in the doorway, his face like carved stone, and told the boy to put on his warmest clothes. They were going to check the trap lines, he said. Thomas knew better. He had seen the look in his father's eyes, the way the man couldn't meet his gaze. They walked into the whiteness together, Thomas struggling through the deep snow, his twisted leg making each step an agony. His father moved ahead, always just out of reach, never offering a helping hand. They walked for what felt like hours, deeper into the wilderness than Thomas had ever been. Then his father stopped. They were in a clearing surrounded by tall pines, their branches heavy with snow. The wind howled through the trees like a living thing, and Thomas could barely see 3 feet in front of him through the driving snow. "Wait here," his father said, his voice nearly lost in the wind. "I need to check something." Thomas waited. Minutes passed, then an hour. The cold crept into his bones, and he called out for his father, but there was no answer. Only the wind and the endless snow. Eventually, Thomas understood. His father wasn't coming back. The boy tried to walk, but the snow was too deep, his leg too weak. He managed to reach a massive pine tree and huddled against its trunk, pulling his coat tight around his shaking body. The cold was relentless, seeping through his clothes, numbing his fingers and toes. He thought of his mother, wondered if she would have let this happen. Tears froze on his cheeks. Night fell, though in the storm it was hard to tell day from night. Thomas drifted in and out of consciousness, his body shutting down to conserve warmth. In his fading awareness, he thought he saw golden eyes watching him from the darkness. He decided he must be dreaming, but the eyes were real. They belonged to a white wolf, a massive creature that moved through the storm like a ghost. The wolf had been watching the boy for hours, circling at a distance, studying him with an intelligence that seemed almost human. This wolf knew abandonment. She had been cast out from her pack for being too old, too slow. She had survived alone through 2 winters, learning the bitter lesson that the world was not kind to the weak. Yet something in the boy's stillness, his quiet acceptance of his fate, stirred something in the wolf's ancient heart. She approached slowly, her paws making no sound in the deep snow. Thomas opened his eyes and saw her there, close enough to touch. He was too cold to be afraid. If death came with golden eyes and white fur, then so be it. The wolf circled him once, then twice. Then she did something remarkable. She lay down beside the boy, pressing her warm body against his cold one. Her thick fur provided insulation against the brutal wind, and her body heat began to seep into Thomas's frozen limbs. The boy instinctively wrapped his arms around her, burying his face in her fur. The wolf remained still, accepting this strange embrace. Through the long night, the wolf stayed with Thomas, keeping him alive through the worst of the blizzard. When dawn finally came, the storm had passed, leaving the world transformed. The sun emerged, turning the snow into a field of diamonds. Thomas woke slowly, surprised to find himself still breathing, still alive. The white wolf sat nearby, watching him with those knowing golden eyes. Thomas struggled to his feet, his legs stiff and painful from the cold. He knew he should try to find his way back to the village, but something held him there. He looked at the wolf, and the wolf looked back, and an understanding passed between them. For 3 days, the wolf stayed with Thomas in the wilderness. She brought him rabbits she had caught, laying them at his feet. She led him to a small cave where he could shelter from the wind. At night, she lay beside him, sharing her warmth. Thomas learned to move as she did, to read the forest as she read it, to survive in a world that had tried to kill him. The boy discovered something during those days. He was stronger than he had ever known. His twisted leg might slow him down, but his mind was sharp, his spirit unbroken. The wolf had shown him that survival wasn't about being the fastest or the strongest. It was about adaptation, about finding your place in the world even when the world didn't want you. On the fourth day, Thomas made a decision. He would not return to the village, not to a father who had left him to die. Instead, he would make his own way. The wolf seemed to understand. She led him through the forest to an old trapper's cabin, abandoned but still sound. It would be his home now. The seasons turned. Thomas learned to trap and fish, to tan hides and preserve meat. The white wolf, whom he named Luna, stayed with him, hunting in the forests and always returning to the cabin. She brought him other gifts, a deer hide here, a cluster of medicinal herbs there. It was as if she had appointed herself his guardian, determined that this boy would not just survive, but thrive. Spring came, then summer. Word spread through the villages of the crippled boy who lived in the wilderness with a white wolf, the boy who had been left to die but had instead found a life more free than any he had known before. Some called him wild, others called him blessed. Thomas didn't care. He had learned that family wasn't always blood, that strength came in many forms, and that sometimes the most loyal hearts beat in the chests of wolves. Years would pass, and Thomas would grow into a man, his cabin becoming a waypoint for travelers who had lost their way. He would become known as a healer, a guide, someone who understood the language of the wilderness. And always beside him would be the white wolf, growing old as he grew tall but never leaving his side. They had saved each other, the boy and the wolf. In that frozen clearing where he should have died, Thomas had instead found his true family, his purpose, his home. The world had tried to cast him out, but in being cast out, he had discovered something precious, that sometimes the greatest gifts come wrapped in the coldest storms, and that love can be found in the most unexpected places. In the end, they were both survivors, both outcasts who had found in each other exactly what they needed to not just live, but to truly be alive.